Hello, good morning. Good morning to everyone. I hope you can hear me properly. We're really great. It's really great to see you all here today. We're here to talk about something big and very important for our country, the Philippine Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDC. It's our country's plan to cut emissions and build a greener future. But making sense of this plan and the science behind it is really be tricky. So today we'll be joined by a lot of experts to break it down for you. You'll hear from them about where emissions are coming from, what solutions are working, and how the updated NDC is actually setting goals for a country. Most importantly, we'll also talk about how your stories as journalists can turn these ideas into action. Um, we have a lot of experts in our backstage, and they want to get to know who are the people in the audience. So if you can put in the comments your names and also your news agencies, I can already see Raids Barsha from um, Bicol, and also Francis Angelo of the Daily Guardian. We also invited a lot of people in our Philippine exclusive Philippine Climate Media Network. So if you're here, kindly say hi to our experts. You can all ask them your questions later on. But before anything else, I know you're already excited to ask your questions, but we will just have a quick presentation from all of our speakers. So you will be able to see um, all of the summary of the Philippine Climate Change Assessment Working Group 3. To kick things off, we are here to hear from our experts. First up is one of our lead authors for WG3, Ms. Agnes De Jesus. She will be followed by Mr. Leandro Buendia, but first, we are now here joined by Ms. Agnes. So, Ms. Agnes, I'm loading your presentation right now, and hang tight, guys, because this will be a bit of like a lot of things will happen in this presentation, but I hope you'll be able to jot it down later on for your questions. So take it away, Miss Agnes.
I think Andrew will come first, the first
Oh,
chapters.
sorry po.
Thank you.
Um, Sir Andrew.
Okay. Thank you. So can I operate this slides, Vienna, or
Yes,
you will be the one? Okay, I can operate it. Let me
yes,
try.
po.
Okay, good. Okay. So you can you hear me clearly, everybody? Good
Yes.
morning. And first, maybe I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to share with you the highlights of the Working Group 3 assessment on mitigation. As a starting point, by way of introduction, I'd like to give you an overview of the chapter of the assessment that we did. Chapter 1 is dealing on introduction. Chapter 2 on institutional arrangement and related mitigation policies. Chapter 3 on the Philippine National Greenhouse Gas Inventories. And Chapter 4 on approaches to climate change mitigation. And Chapter 5, initiatives of the non-state actors. I will be dealing on from Chapter 1 to Chapter 3, and Agnes will be talking about Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. So for Chapter 1, this is actually the basis and the purpose of the report. And I would say that we benefited from the first assessment report that we did in 2018. This time we are focusing on the data and information for tracking the progress of the NDC, because we want to support the nationally determined contribution of the Philippines. And also we aim to support the development of the country's BTR1, the Biennial Transparency Report 1. Actually, that is due on the end of December 2024, and I think climate change is already in the final stage. So we aim to support that, and also please take note that the development of this report is based on the literatures that we gathered between 2016 and 2014, and this includes documents about some literatures, policy statements, conference proceedings, industry report, research report, and other fact sheets that we can avail of. For the chapter 2, it's talking about how the agencies involved on mitigation. And I would say that, as you may be aware, the Philippines has submitted already two national communications. And that national communication that contains chapter on greenhouse gas inventory. I would say previously, those inventories in the national communication, they were done by consultants. But now I think we're benefiting from the Executive Order 174 of the Climate Change Commission, that's a 2014, and that created the Philippine Greenhouse Gas Inventory Management Reporting System. Because of this, it has facilitated the preparation and development of greenhouse gas inventory in the country. We have a good institutional arrangement. It's, I believe it's more sustainable than the previous one because depending on consultant, it's not sustainable. And also, this institutional arrangement is supporting the development of the NDC and the BTR, and in support of the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement, they have also developed a system. They call it NICDIS. I don't call it NICDIS, NICDIS. And it has something to do with the information system, that they can integrate all the informations on adaptation and mitigation that can be used for planning purposes, for developing adaptation and mitigation measures. So I think that is very, very important. These two orders or systems that they have developed under the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. Now, let's talk about the, also there, in chapter 2, there are some policies that we included there on mitigation, focusing on mitigation. So you can see from there, we have reported existing policies and measures addressing climate change mitigation related to renewable energy, fuel efficiency, sustainable practices, protecting rehabilitation of forests, and also reducing the emissions from waste. Out of this existing, we call it PUMS, were the basis of developing the baseline and the mitigation scenarios that we use for the NDC. Let's talk about chapter 3, and this is the meat of, I would say, the report on the mitigation in terms of the profile of the emissions in the Philippines. You know, to date, the Philippines, as I mentioned, we have performed 5 official national greenhouse gas inventories in the Philippines. That's for the year 1994, that's in the first national communication. We have the year 2000 in the second national communication. We have 2010, 2015, and 2020 that will be included in future reporting. In terms of the profile of our emissions by gas, CO2 emission is the highest. As you can see from the figure, it ranges from, I cannot see clearly, but at 51% to about 61.3%. So it's quite high. And it's followed by methane. It's ranging from about 32 to 40%. And the last would be N2O. Of course, there are also other gases, but these are the 3 major gases required by under the Paris Agreement to be reported. So in terms of total emission, if you talk about the 2020 estimate, it's about 227,181 kilotons of CO2. And that is about almost 1.17 times the 1994 total emission. In terms of the trend or of our emission, meaning based from 1994 to 2020, I think our emission is increasing at the rate of 4,318 kilotons of CO2 per year. So that's how we are increasing from 1994 to the year 2020. So in terms of the by sector, this is the profile and the trend of our emission by sector. The highest emitter, of course, will be the energy sector. It ranges from something like 48 to about 56% of the total emission. And in 2020, it's about 57%. And this followed by agriculture, so energy, and then agriculture and waste sector. These are highly correlated in terms of how they increase. And as you can see from the figure, energy, agriculture, and waste, they are in the increasing trend over the years. Okay, and then so focusing on energy sector, the highest emitter from the energy sector category is the energy industry. So this is how we produce our energy, say power generations, using coal, using fossil fuels. So we're still dependent on these fossil fuels, and this is the highest emitter in terms of the energy sector. The rate is about 2,132 kilotons of CO2 per year, and that's very highly correlated in terms of how it is increasing. And the second one is a transport emission. But the rate is, it's not highly correlated. We have only R squared of 0.71. Maybe because if we can increase our effort in, having an annual estimates of the transport, we can see clearly how it's going up. Or I would say it's really going up. So these two are the main sources of emissions from the energy sector. So we have the energy industries or the energy generations and the transport. Overall, the emission from energy sector is increasing at the rate of 2,746 kilotons CO2 per year. And that's highly correlated, as you can see from the figure. And then in terms of the industrial processes and product use, the highest emission is coming from the mineral industry, and that includes the cement industry. We have many constructions going on, and we need cement for that. Almost 86% of the emissions in this sector is coming from the cement industry, and that's in 2020. And we have also followed by emission from metal industry. This is iron and steel industry. So and the rate of change of emission for this category is not highly correlated. So we cannot predict what is happening. It goes going up and going down. But we know for a fact that we have these two subcategories in the EPU sector that's emitting quite significantly over the years, the mineral industry and the metal industry. In terms of agriculture, of course, our highest emission comes from the rice cultivation. This is methane emission from rice. It's about 50% in 2020, and the rate of increase is the increase or the trend is increasing very highly correlated at the rate of 346 kilotons CO2 per year. It's highly correlated. Please take note that the methane emission is a function of the increasing irrigation facilities that we have. So the more we have good irrigation facilities, I would say we will be increasing our methane, because methane, of course, when you have anaerobic condition. And the second in line is the N2 emission from managed soil, and that includes the fertilization, the application of fertilizer. We are producing a lot of crops, and we need to fertilize them. And inorganic fertilizer, they're a main source of N2O emissions. And then we have also emission from enteric fermentation. This is coming from livestock, the animal stomach, from cattle, from buffalo. We have big population of buffalo. So we have this significant increase in methane emission from enteric fermentation, but it's not highly correlated. So overall, the emission from energy sector is increasing at the rate of, I cannot see it. It's down there, but it's increasing at the rate of change. I cannot see it clearly, but maybe you can see it from the bottom. Okay. Yeah, sorry for that. I cannot see it from my figure. And then for the land use change and forestry, that's the LULUCF sector. For a fact that the Philippines is now a carbon sink. Our forest is growing. They are sequestering a lot of carbon. But, the trend may be depending on how we will be managing our forests, because our forest and emissions can be coming from forest and grassland conversion. If we harvest our trees with the growing forest, then that will be equivalent to emission of CO2. But overall, I think we cannot predict the trend in our emission from LULUCF, because it's fluctuating and it's not highly correlated. Maybe in the future, we can have a dedicated effort on how we can estimate on annual basis. We can see the trend in the emissions from our forestry over the years. And finally, for the waste sector, the emission comes mostly from wastewater treatment and discharge. The highest is 59% in 2020. And there's also an increasing amount of emission from solid waste disposal. Our solid waste is about 40% of the total emission. And so, but overall, our emission from waste sector is increasing at the rate of 725 kilotons CO2, and it's highly correlated. The report also included, this I think my final slide, we have included the key category analysis result. You know, the meaning of key category assessment is if you want to improve your inventory, you have to identify the main sources of your emission in the country. And this is the key category assessment. There are two ways of doing that. You can check the level of emission of per category, and you can also assess the trend of emission. Obviously, in our case, we don't have an annual emission, so we have only the level assessment. So in terms of the level assessment, you can see the number one in terms of contribution is the energy industries. This is how we produce our electricity. It's about 21% contributing to the total emission. So it's very high. And then if you have to talk about also forest land conversion, harvesting of our trees, timber, and that also contribute about 16%. So the list that we have here, as you can see in the screen, these are the major contributors of our emissions in the year 2020. I think there are two key category analysis that they did, one for 2015 and one for 2020. So I'm just showing to you the 2020 result of the key category analysis. So in terms of improving the accuracy of our estimate, we can depend on this, and also we can use this for effective development of mitigation policies and measures for the country. So I think that's all that I can report to you, and I will give it back to Agnes, and then later we can have the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Andrew, for that presentation. It was a lot, but hopefully we get to break it down later on during our Q&A session. Ms. Agnes, your turn for your presentation, please.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And I thank the government with the Climate Change Commission and the OML Center for giving the group the trust to chronicle our journey in trying to get into the mitigation approaches that will help our country meet the NDC. So for this presentation, I will complete the content of the report based on where Professor Buendia left off. I'm going to discuss what was the environmental setting during the reporting period, what was our reference for mitigation, which is the Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, what are the approaches approved by government up to 2030, what are the contributions of non-state actors. For the first time, we introduced the non-government players. We also benchmarked the country's plans with the global good practices on decarbonization. A slide on energy transition, which is very important in decarbonization, and some key takeaways. So like any other part of the world, we have seen before our eyes the wrath of climate change. 70% of the period was under the COVID-19 until the slow downturn in early 2020 in terms of the economic aspect. We also saw overlapping polycrisis on the left, like a roller coaster, sustained but continuous, from recession to continuous climate change up to biodiversity breakdown. We also saw the report of the World Meteorological Organization in July 2022 of the global boiling or heating of the world up to 2060, a report from the Stockholm Environmental Institute that we have breached the 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries or ceiling, like climate change, fresh water, and then 5 of 9 tipping points that can cause irreversible impacts have been breached. And then also last year, the hottest on record, we temporarily breached the 1.5 degrees centigrade limit in 2023. And therefore, you see terms like global warming before in the 1990s and 2000, to global boiling in 2023, to flash flood and flash droughts last year. And then in January with Los Angeles, we call it weather whiplash. By weather whiplash, meaning significant, frequent, and huge swing in dry to wet periods and wet to dry periods. That's why in Los Angeles, during the wet periods, there was a lot of vegetation, and then a swing to the very dry period that caused the burning of the vegetation as fuel. So this is where we are. And amidst this climate crisis, there was a report assessing the performance of the Southeast Asian countries in 2021. And in that report, including the Philippines, they say that even our NDC targets will still increase the absolute emissions up to 2030 from 2018. However, there's a good point that happened in the Philippines. We pivoted in October 2020 when we declared coal moratorium and focus on RE in the Philippines. So the reference for the mitigation action approved and selected by the various agencies of government is the Nationally Determined Contributions, or the NDC, of April 2021. Our commitment is to act on the GHG projected emissions from 2020 to 2030, or 3,340.3 million metric tons or megatons of carbon, reducing 75% based on certain conditions. If we have international support, resources, and funding, we can reduce 72.29%, or we'll reduce that based on international support. And if obligatory or unconditional without support, we can only reduce our 75% target by 2.71%. So based on those NDCs or mitigation commitments, our government agencies arduously work on their measures from 2021 to 2023 up to 2024. In this table, I summarize them all for you. And this is how to read the table. The first column is the sector. The second column is the contribution of the sector based on the 2020 inventory of the Climate Change Commission. And then the mitigation measures selected up to 2030, the policies that have been issued, and the cost of completing those measures. So for the energy sector first, the business as usual without any action in 2023, energy contributes 57.6% of the total emissions of the country. In terms of the NDC implementation plan, or NDCIP, it plans to reduce 59% of the target, equivalent to 587 megatons. And these are the measures. And let me walk you through the measures. Energy efficiency, that's based on an Energy Efficiency Act. And if only a fraction is programmed, but if we complete that Energy Efficiency Act, the target is almost 14,000 megawatts. Renewable energy, the energy mix will have more renewables, up to 35% of the mix by 2030. A lot of blending of biofuels, the switch of coal plants to more benign fuel, smart grids to improve the efficiency of the grid, also new sources like batteries, and other technologies are being studied like hydrogen and nuclear power. 30 policies have been issued by the sector, almost 60% of the total policies for the period, and the cost of the measures will be $36.5 billion. For the transport sector, the contribution of that sector is 22.8% without mitigation. They're targeting 7% of our commitment through the following: improvement of public utilities in terms of standards and efficiencies, increasing mass transit, by extension the railways projects, a lot of mass transit like BRTs or rapid transit, green ports, meaning low carbon ferries in Manila or even electric ferries in Cebu, including the operations of ports. Night rating. This is to reduce the condensation trails or fumes at the back of all aviation, because these fumes or condensation trails tend to absorb energy or heat during daytime, and therefore night flight is being encouraged, and a lot of airports are being night rated or given the facilities for night flights. Of course, a lot of innovations in terms of technologies and changes in fuel standards. 9 policies have been issued for the period, and 32.8 billion US dollars will be used for those measures or needed for those measures. For the agricultural sector, 23.49% without mitigation. They're targeting 211 megatons or 21% of the target through various means. As Professor Buendia said, when the rice field is irrigated, it's anaerobic, there's methane production, and therefore there's a need for alternating wet and drying cropping. Also, because cattle have methane in their stomach, the selective livestock breeding and certain feed stock are being studied. Also, in terms of mature, converting the methane to energy. In terms of fertilizer, because as he said, there are a lot of fertilizers that are sources of emissions. Therefore, more accurate assessment of the quantity of fertilizer will avoid excess use of fertilizer. There's also a proposal for zero biomass burning. Of course, this is qualified. These are allowed in indigenous people's land because it's something cultural. And then, of course, the use of RE like solar in agricultural and fisheries industries. There is no policy issued because the existing policies are adequate. The cost will be $1 billion. For the waste segment, they have a contribution of 13.08%. They are targeting to mitigate 7% through various means by making sure that they expand all the treatment facilities from sewage to septage to wastewater, also composting organic waste so that we can retrieve the nutrients and redirect the organics so that they don't go to the landfill where methane can be produced because that's again anaerobic. Of course, recovery of methane from landfill and from the municipal solid waste. No policy has been issued because the existing policies are adequate and the cost for those measures is around $1.6 billion. In the industrial process and product use, the contribution is 7.28%. They will target 6% reduction through various means. The substitution of clinker in cement, because cement needs around 1,450 degrees centigrade in their kiln to heat. The increase in the recycling of glass refuse into the glass production, the destruction of ozone-depleting substances, because when we didn't want the ozone to have a hole, we changed our substances to hydrofluorochlorides, which turned out to have 14,800 times the emission potential of carbon. Of course, waste heat recovery and the use of other fuel sources for cement kilns from diesel or bunker to more benign fuel. 2 policies were issued, but 9 policies for industrial processes were issued, and the cost is $0.19 billion. For the land use and land use change in forestry, it is a sink. They can actually absorb this much, but there's an additional storage of 113.6 megatons. And these are the systems that absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. For the protection of forests in red, reduction of emissions from forest degradation and deforestation. The reforestation under the National Breeding Program with this capacity to absorb. And of course, the community-based forestry management projects. 2 policies have been issued, but this is not part of the NDC, so there is no allocation. All in all, the 2020 business as usual, no mitigation, emissions of the country is 260 megatons. We are targeting to at least reduce it by 990 megatons. 50 policies have been issued, and the total cost will be $72 billion or 14.1 trillion pesos. Now, we also added the contribution of the non-state actors this time. And the rationale are as follows. We want to recognize the contribution of the non-government actors. We want to affirm that they too have the capability to complement government efforts. Of course, with acceptance from the ground and support, there's easier implementation of policies and programs, and it can even facilitate transformative actions due to the imagination and aspirations of the public. Outside policies, the Assessment Report 6 of the UN also said and studied that behavioral changes can actually reduce up to 40 to 70% of our emission. And lastly, we want to stress that there's a need to fully implement Section 16 of the Climate Change Act of 2009, which empowers the public to participate in policy planning and in program implementation. All in all, the potential contributions of state actors include the sharing of their expectation to the government so that government can be guided in their policies and decisions. They can augment the country's climate performance. They can be a second layer of analysis to make our plans more robust. They can assist the government in monitoring and mobilizing societal concerns and also societal support and consensus. They too, in addition to government, can formulate complementary strategies and models, and of course, monitor the activities of everyone for transparency. And the contributions of these actors are listed on Chapter 6. We look at the public data available from the academe minus the state universities. For academic institutions, most of them reduce the carbon footprint of their campuses. They have various projects on mitigation from energy efficiency, renewable energy, waste management, and sustainable mobility. We look at the initiatives of 3 business associations and 6 local conglomerates. Most of them support the Sustainable Development Goals. They have a lot of climate change initiatives in terms of mitigation, very, very diverse, from renewable energy to green building to sustainable manufacturing, carbon sinks, fuel efficiency, and even responsible consumption. We look at the environmental NGOs, 4 of them. They're into reduction also, conservation, rehabilitation, and carbon sinks, and coastal cleanup, plus, of course, climate awareness education. Civil society organizations, they're into campaigning for sustainable and resilient communities. They look for responsible use and responsible management of resources. There are CSOs that are campaigning against the early ending of fossil fuel use, clean energy transition, and even greenhouse gas accounting. We looked into 2 indigenous peoples organizations that focus on conservation and protecting their ancestral domain, but also emphasizing the traditional practices on how to care for land and water. We also look into 3 faith-based organizations that support the ban on coal and then support also collective action for mitigation. Then we look at the initiatives of the government, compare them with the decarbonization practices worldwide. Out of the 12 good practices, there are only 2 that we missed: the Independent National Energy Center and a policy to electrify everything. Otherwise, we are good. We have done most of the good practices, from the early issuance of our NDC to an implementation plan of the NDC to optimal energy mix. We have no policy, but we follow the energy trilemma on affordability, environmental sustainability, and energy security. Energy efficiency, we do have a law on that as early as 2019. Investment in transmission lines. For RE, there is already a circular on competitive RE zones that look into this. The coal phase out in October 2020, even a study with ADB on the energy transition mechanism for repurposing of coal power projects. The grid modernization is part of the roadmap of DOE. The centralization of energy for resilience and localization of energy sources is part of the Microgrid Systems Act of 2022. The economy-wide carbon pricing, there are carbon taxes and emissions trading and low-carbon economy bills filed in Congress. And of course, the nature-based solutions, the policy is being studied by DNR. Since 2022, templates are being produced, and soon we expect them to be released. What are the implications of all of this that we've gathered? Number one, in terms of policy, we have no problem of policy inertia or stagnant policy making because, as you saw, our government and agencies are attuned to what's happening, and depending on the variables, there are as many policies that were issued. In terms of funding, there is a challenge. When we came up with the granular plans of 990 megatons or 29.6% of the target, amounting to 14.1 trillion, we still need to look for those. And then if we look at the balance 5 years from now, we said 2030, the balance of the 45.4% of the 75% will still need 1.53 times funding or 21.57 trillion pesos more. So we will ask for international support, but at worst case, if there are few that will come, we should also look at green investment of our local investors or business, which can serve as new markets for them, like electric vehicles, smart meters, green transformers. These are all coming out in the Philippines, independent of the policy. Because it has business case, there's market for that. On infrastructure, we need to beef up and concentrate on those that will support climate actions like transmission lines, our transport networks, and so on. And of course, there are opportunities for community innovations and community actions. In terms of energy transition, there is a section on transition fuel. If it's not RE, what are the pros and cons? Based on the studies in various jurisdictions, the advantages of fossil transition fuel that has been selected by the government is it can really address the intermittency of the renewable energy. It provides reliable energy, and usually they are affordable. However, there are downsides. By having a transition fuel which is not RE, it may delay the transition for RE. It will lock in emissions and will crowd out investments for RE. But the question is 100% RE possible for the Philippines right now? There is a study that says yes, but we need to prepare 6 enablers. In 2021, the University of Finland and the University of the Philippines Electrochemical Laboratory came out with a unique study where they modeled on an hourly basis for a year all types of technologies, all types of transition fuel, and they came out with this. That 100% RE can be done in the Philippines, but we need to help in the following enablers. Solar must surge, 50% of which are utility scale, because as you know, solar is only 25% available. Number 2, if we don't want the fossil transition fuel, we can use utility battery, they said, for storage, but the price of this battery must substantially go down, and we need to have a continuous stream of source of lithium and the rare earths that are needed for this and RE. Number 3, we need to prepare our financials. The cost of the whole electric system during the transition will increase from 20 billion euros a year to 55 billion euros a year because of the capex, the new plants. Number 4, the modeling assumes that there is a transmission line available everywhere there is an RE resource or there is a demand. Number 5, coal will be replaced by solar, but nat gas will be needed during peak loads at specific periods. And then the last, the use of carbon capture is still put in there even as it's still in infancy to support the RE transition. And lastly, for key takeaways, our country had a good progress since the last version of PhilCA. Even as we are 70% constrained during the period, we have firm measures and targets for at least 30%. We have completed the NDC implementation plan and the National Adaptation Plan. We have adequate policies in place. And lately, more consultation of stakeholders are happening to comply with the Climate Change Act. To realize our plans, we need sustained attention of leadership on the mitigation plan. We need to access scalable technologies, also access innovative funding mechanisms, and everyone must do their share, and the country must act as one. When the country acts as one, the groups have different roles. Government will issue enabling mechanisms, set standards, establish the infrastructure, and provide the technical and financial support. Business must accelerate the ambition of the country by aligning their investment with the NDC implementation plan and develop clean technologies that can be part of their market. The public must participate in climate-related planning and implementation, and they must have climate-informed actions from energy conservation, managing waste, efficient appliances, and even retrofitting their homes. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Miss Agnes and Sir Andrew. Now we move over to Arnold Bilver of the Climate Change Commission for his presentation. Later on, we already have questions from our colleagues, and we'll be able to answer that with some of our authors of the WG3 report as well. So thank you for those questions. Keep them coming. Um, Hi, good morning, Arnold.
Good morning po. Thank
Yes,
you,
yes,
Biana.
thank you.
Am I having it clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead with the presentation. Are you able to control the slides?
Yes, we will
Okay,
control the slides na.
okay. Thank
Maraming
you.
salamat po. Good morning, everyone. Sir Leandro and Ma'am Agnes, it's an honor to join you in the program today. Maraming salamat po for sharing the highlights of the Philippine Climate Change Assessment Report, and of course, to Ma'am Agnes also for giving us a more detailed presentation on the PAMs. So, on behalf of the Climate Change Commission, at the outset, we extend our gratitude to the OML Center for giving us the space to share with you the updates on the preparation for the enhanced NDC, and of course, the highlights of the Philippine NDC implementation plan. So in the next few minutes, I am tasked to give a brief presentation on the NDCIP and our preparation for updating the NDC. So the nationally determined contribution, or the NDCs as we call it, remain to be the cornerstone of our shared vision of limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. So despite our minimal contribution to the global greenhouse gas emissions, the Philippines conveys a highly ambitious first NDC to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, in 2021. So we are committing a projected GHG emissions reduction and avoidance of 75% for the sectors of agriculture, waste, industry, transport, and energy. So of this 75%, 2.71% is unconditional and 72.29% is conditional. Ibig sabihin po, we rely on external support, or what you call the means of implementation, through climate finance, through technology transfer, and through capacity building. So our NDC is a testament of our support to the Paris Agreement, but also our recognition that enabling low carbon systems and technologies is a massive opportunity for us to modernize our sectors and avoid further contributions to global warming and climate change. So it must also be emphasized that the NDC is a multi-decadal progressive commitment. So it also represents the country's aspirational investment plan in clean and climate-friendly technologies. So it is primarily what we call the GHG mitigation centric, but it also reflects the Philippines' adaptation requirements over time. So to set out a roadmap and the actions for implementing the NDC, the implementation plan or the NDCIP was developed building on the country's existing laws, regulations, and plans, as well as existing sources of climate finance, considering the elaborated mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development using a bottom-up approach, focusing on sector-level actions and needs. And it also outlines the policies and measures which we've been hearing in the first two speakers, the policies and measures or the PAMs to reduce or avoid emissions in 5 sectors. So this is a product of a multi-stakeholder effort po, where the Climate Change Commission and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources facilitated in the last 2 years. So in summary, the delivery of the Philippine NDC will require an estimated investment of around $72 billion. This is based on the costed PAMs set out by the sector departments. But we would also like to highlight that this figure is an underestimation of the full cost required, as first is that it does not include a full picture of the private sector costs associated with the actions. And second, PAMs have not been fully costed at this time due to lack of availability of data. And of course, third, costs are expected to change as PAMs are further revised to increase ambition of mitigation actions. So if we dig deeper, the greatest financing needs are in the energy sector, where they are estimated to require an investment of $36.5 billion US dollars, followed by the transport sector, where investment needs are estimated at almost 33 billion. So between them, both sectors, energy and transport, account for approximately 97% of the identified investment needs. These investment, of course, will be supported by the government budget, the development partners support, and of course, the private sector. So we crafted our NDC as our country's mitigation plan to reduce the overall burden on the planet. But as mentioned earlier, we also intended to support the strengthening of our adaptive capacity. So this is in recognition that mitigation is the best form of adaptation. And in that, as we mitigate, we also minimize the scale and intensity of climate impacts that we need to adapt to. So our NDC, target is ambitious, but it's also achievable. And we've identified these 6 pillars where we need to deliver and prioritize actions. So in summary, these are achieving the conditional and unconditional objectives of the NDC, and then working or advancing the work with international partners, exploring market-based actions, strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity, cascading actions to the subnational level. This is very important because we don't want a plan, especially a development plan, that it's only at the national level. We fail to cascade it to the subnational or the LGUs. And lastly, of course, ensuring private sector participation or engagement. So the NDC outputs and outcomes must therefore be anchored on strong bilateral, regional, and multilateral cooperation. We also need to take advantage of the benefits of market mechanisms and non-market approaches under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, in line, of course, with our national circumstances and sustainable development aspirations. So this slide shows the key considerations for the NDC implementation. The implementation of the NDC will be conducted in the context of a just transition of its sectors into a green economy. So the government of the Philippines considered decent work and human capital development as central in promoting environmentally sustainable growth and in building climate resilience through just transition. So the NDC implementation will therefore seek and reinforce synergies between environmental, economic, and social issues. Last year, we just held a kick-off ceremony for the development of a just transition roadmap for the Philippines. So we will also update you on the development of this initiative as it becomes available. Second, the implementation of the NDC in the Philippines takes full regard of the need to balance gender and inclusion considerations. So this reflects that Filipino women and girls are at the same time highly exposed to climate change impacts, given their limited access to resources, particularly financial resources, as they are less likely to participate in the workforce. On the other hand, they also provide a labor force reservoir for economic growth and the development of new sustainable business approaches. So, third, the LGUs have a critical role to play in the delivery of PAMs. I've mentioned earlier because this is particularly the case for the delivery of local transport projects, say the delivery of electric vehicle charging locations, and the handling of waste and sewage projects, for example. So to ensure the successful realization of these PAMs, LGUs will be closely involved with the relevant sector departments and the delivery of the current and, of course, the formalization of future PAMs. And lastly, since since a wide range of risks could affect the delivery of the PAMs, we also aim to establish a risk registry that captures this and identifies the approaches to mitigating them. So the risk register is a living document which will be updated and amended throughout the delivery of the NDC. So climate change is a complex challenge that cannot be solved by any one entity, by one entity. And collaboration between government agencies, the civil society organizations, the academe, private sector, and the local communities is crucial. So we must create an environment where partnerships thrive and innovative solutions are encouraged. This can be done through fostering a collaborative approach, and we can maximize our impact and ensure that our efforts are sustainable and long-term. So we wish to highlight also at this point the role of the development partners, especially in fulfilling our partnership goal in unlocking climate finance. So we, of course, other than the development partners, the role of the academe, the role of the private institutions, these are all vital, and because these are vital link in accessing and leveraging the climate funds and technical expertise, and of course, cutting edge innovation our country needs in order to deliver the adaptation and mitigation actions as outlined in the NDCIP, and of course our National Adaptation Plan. So moving forward towards the development of our NDC, so pursuant to the Decision 1 of CMA 5 and of course COP21, parties shall submit to the Secretariat the next nationally determined contribution at least 9 to 12 months in advance of the 7th Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting to the Paris Agreement. So, ibig sabihin po, expectedly, the Philippines should submit the enhanced NDC before COP30. So, as an update, of course, as part of the commitment under the convention, the Philippines intends to submit it before November this year. The CCC is currently coordinating with the relevant agencies. In fact, last December, we already held a multi-stakeholder consultation with partners, both from the government and the non-state partners, to come up with a timeline and, of course, a draft outline of the updated NDC. And further, we also established a development partners coordination group led by the CCC and the DENR. This is to mobilize support from various development partners in supporting the NDC. And of course, initially this is being headed by the Asian Development Bank along with other development partners. So the considerations of cross-cutting issues in the NDC, we have these three indicative considerations. Of course, this is up for open for suggestions still. For carbon market, we need to assess if the new set of PAMs are part of any international carbon market scheme that the Philippines has taken part of. And ownership and utilization of those credits should be reviewed. We also need to assess if any of the PAMs are part of any domestic or international compliance or voluntary carbon market. We need to ensure that the internationally transferable mitigation outcomes, or the ITMOs, that are sold, transferred, and canceled are not considered to meet the targets of the NDC. We also wish to highlight that the NDC, the updated NDC, may indicate in which sectors, categories, and international carbon market mechanism will be used. And we also need to consider the ongoing carbon policy or market technical assistance supported by other development partners. So next is on emissions trading in carbon tax. The NDC may highlight, the updated NDC may highlight in which sector categories and technologies the emission trading system, or the ETS, or the carbon tax, will be introduced. Given the ongoing study in carbon pricing, the Philippines may consider explicitly referencing the role of an ETS and carbon tax as future mitigation tools within NDC 2025. And lastly, we also need to assess how to apply corresponding adjustments for internationally traded ETS credits in the future. And just transition, I also mentioned this earlier, we have to evaluate the impacts of the key PAMs, such as phasing out of fossil fuels, introducing new renewable energies, upgrading waste facilities, modernizing agriculture, among others, or how it affects our workers in the affected industry. And we also need to look at the potential issues related to decent work standards, ensuring that just transition in this sector is embedded. And lastly, of course, we need to ensure the alignment of the new NDC with the development of, again, the Philippine Just Transition Framework. So that's my last slide to end. We would like again to highlight that the NDCIP, just like the NAP, or the National Adaptation Plan, is designed to align seamlessly with existing national frameworks, including the Philippine Development Plan, the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change, and the National Climate Change Action Plan, among others. So these frameworks provide the overarching guidance and direction of our climate resilience and mitigation efforts, ensuring that our actions are coherent and complementary across all levels of governance. So that's my last slide. We are sharing the QR code for the copies of the NDCIP, and of course, a copy of the nationally determined contributions submitted. The Climate Change Commission stands ready po to provide updates and guidance, and of course we will appreciate also the participation and the contribution of OML and our other stakeholders and partners in the ongoing updating of the NDC. So expect po invites from the CCC to our experts and to our other guests in the upcoming workshops po, in the future workshops in updating the NDC. So maraming salamat po at magandang umaga.
Thank you so much, Arnold. So now we bring all of our experts in the room for our Q&A. So if you can open your cameras po sana. So okay. So thank you so much everyone for joining us this morning. Before we answer the questions, medyo mahirap po yung mga tanong na hulis ko dito sa chat, if you can already see it. Can I just have any thoughts from our co-authors, Sir Albert, Miss Aimee, on the presentation of WG3 before we go to the questions? Sir Albert, parang wala po kayong...
Can you hear me now? No? Okay. Am I audible?
We can...
Okay na? Bien na? Okay.
We can't hear you po, Sir Albert.
Thumbs up. Okay. Thank you. So you can hear me now. Okay. Just to share my thoughts also on the overall presentation by the various authors of the report, especially particularly on the NDC. Just a reminder that we are taking seriously our NDC because this is our opportunity to access the support, as highlighted by Arnold, the support, and also as highlighted by Ms. Agnes, that this is an opportunity for the Philippines to access the support which is part of our entitlement under the convention. So we have to be reminded that it is one of the agreements of under the convention that developed countries should support or should extend the means of implementation to developing countries, and helping us achieve our NDC is part of this entitlement. So the challenge now is how to transform this NDC as part of the implementation plan into investable proposal, especially looking at the challenges in transforming the NDC into business models that would entice the private sector also to participate, and even the subnational entities. So we've been saying that our NDC is our investment plan for for the private sector to come in, especially for those sectors assigned to the DNR, the sector under we're in industries. The private sector are fully engaged, like the IPPU sector, the waste management, operationalization of the operation of the waste management facilities, and even looking at the operationalization of wastewater treatment facilities as part of the Clean Water Act. This would need a lot of investments from the private sector, or the private sector of the developed countries who have the obligation to offer us assistance, or to offer us support in order so that we can achieve the remaining or the conditional targets of our NDC. That's all, Vienna. Thank you so much. Pleasant morning to everyone.
Thank you, Sir Albert. Miss Aimee?
And thank you, Vienna. And Good morning to everyone. So first of all, we'd like to thank the OML for organizing this media briefing and for coming up with this PhilCA assessment, PhilCA Working Group 3 report. And this would actually it would be very helpful for the CCC in tracking our climate actions, and it would complement our reporting initiatives in the CCC. So the CCC is always open to partnerships like this, and we hope that we would continue this partnership in the coming years. Thank you po.
Maraming salamat po. Now we move over to the questions from our colleagues in the media. So our first question is from Hannah Fernandez of Eco Business. Blue carbon economy was announced by the Philippines as a sector to be tapped for carbon offsets during COP29. How is it a good mode of carbon offsets as compared to other ways of mitigation? So I'd like to answer first po.
Yeah, I think that we need to look at first blue carbon or carbon stored in wetlands and marine ecosystems, mangroves, marshes, and seaweeds, and they belong to a class of mitigation actions known as nature-based solutions. So when you look at the many mitigation actions, personally, nature-based solution is preferred. I personally prefer it because nature-based solutions not only provide environmental services to address the needs of man, but also the need to enhance biodiversity. But having said that, if NBS, the nature-based solution, is better than most of the mitigation actions, there are two types, the blue carbon and the green carbon. And between the blue carbon and the green carbon, blue carbon is better. Why? Because it can store or remove carbon from the ocean, and the ocean has a greater absorbing capacity, so it has more carbon stored that can actually heat up the earth. The ocean absorbs, I think, 50 to 60% of the atmospheric carbon compared to forest or terrestrial ecosystem that absorb 30%. So in terms of efficiency and potency, capacity, it can absorb greater amounts. And when you look at the things that they do, like mangroves, for example, apart from just absorbing it, they can protect coastal areas. And when you look at the efficiency of absorption, a mangrove tree can absorb 4 to 7 times more than a land or terrestrial forest. So that's the contribution of blue carbon. That's why it's very, very important for us to embrace that mitigation measure. Thank you.
Bianna, can I add to that?
Go ahead po.
Yeah. So, maybe as you can see, as Agnes mentioned, the principle of greenhouse gas inventory is we cannot manage what we don't quantify. And at the moment, I would say in terms of our submission of greenhouse gas inventory, mangrove is part of it, but we don't estimate emission from at the moment from seaweeds and other aquatic marines, simply because the methodology is not available for that. But I think the IPCC has come up with a methodology in the 2013 wetland supplement that we can use. So what I'm saying is in the future, we can think about, we need first to quantify how much is, the emissions that or the carbon sequestration potential of, the seaweeds in addition to mangrove. That we can say this is quite significant, and then we can include it in our mitigation effort. But as we have also to be mindful of the uncertainty associated with our estimates. So in terms of the good mode, the question about Hannah's about the mode of carbon offset, we will have to be, first to quantify the emission, the potential of the aquatic, organisms in terms of how of the amount, and then I think that's something that we can include in our future mitigation options. Thank you.
Anyone else po from the group?
Yes, BNF, if I also can add. to this concern on blue carbon, because as we all know, this is also this form part of our mandate, especially by our Biodiversity Management Bureau, which is handling concerns about blue carbon. So we have started. In fact, we have already the DNR has already expressed its interest to be engaged in blue carbon projects as part of the nature-based solution, as mentioned by Ms. Agnes. So we would like to work on this, and then in fact, some of the proponents on blue carbon would like also to be engaged in carbon trading, making use of the existing mangrove forest in accounting the sequestration rates. I mean, the sequestration capabilities of the existing ecosystems that could help in the sequestration of carbon. So, of course, there is this a challenge again to look at the methodologies as the contribution by mangroves and even the seagrasses were not included. Were not included in the inventory of the greenhouse gas for the Philippines. So, but of course, we will still be we will be working with our partners in having a well accounted contribution of this the ecosystem. Thank you, Vienna.
Thank you so much, Sir Albert. Anyone from the CCC would like to answer this question before we move on?
Yes, maraming salamat po. Of course, the first speakers already articulated the view also of the CCC. But just to highlight po, no, of course, the blue carbon economy offers a highly effective and multifaceted approach to carbon offset. We cannot highlight more the importance of nature-based solutions because, the blue carbon uniquely suited to the Philippines' geographic and social economic context now because by tapping the blue carbon, we don't just contribute to mitigation adaptation by promoting biodiversity and supporting sustainability. So we welcome this po, and we will work closely with the lead agencies on this, on how we can maximize the potential of blue carbon in the country. So thank you, Bob.
Before we go to the very juicy questions in our comment section, I'd like to ask this one. Medyo madali po ata ito kaysa dun sa dalawa. Which regions in the Philippines are with the biggest greenhouse gas emission contribution, and which regions with remarkable environmental projects to mitigate their carbon footprint? Do we actually have that data available? Like, can we quantify which regions are emitting the most greenhouse gas and those who are mitigating it? Meron po ba tayong ganong mechanisms ngayon?
Yes, good morning. Let me answer that question, Vienna and everyone. So actually, we do not have reporting on regional greenhouse gas inventory. So at present, what we have established under Executive Order number 174 is for the national greenhouse gas inventory. So this works at a very different framework sa regional or greenhouse gas inventories. we do encourage local government units, so these are cities and municipalities, to develop or to prepare their own greenhouse gas inventory for their jurisdiction, and this would contribute to the development of their local climate change action plans. But for regional inventories, we do not have um, reporting framework for this yet. Thank you.
Yeah, may I chime in? Of course, when you look at the GHG emissions, it should be the most populous region and the most industrialized region. But more than that, we have this Ako Ang Bukas movement. It's a CSO movement whereby we are going to different communities and assisting LGUs to do GHG accounting. Because we have this agreement with the Climate Change Commission that because the responsibility is the national level, that CSOs like Green Convergence can actually teach, and we are teaching communities and LGUs on how to calculate their greenhouse gas emission so that they will know the hot spots, where is the highest emission, is it waste, is it power, and then we work with them and the LGU for the measures, and it ultimately goes into their local climate change action plan. So it's still incipient, but it is a good step because LGUs, communities down to sitios, can actually calculate their emissions. And our case pilot is in Ormoc, Barangay Cogon in Ormoc, so that the other 110 barangays in Ormoc can do it. And then based on the transform program of DNR, together with the ILG, all LGUs now are using the format, and our Ako Ang Bukas movement is the partner of government for the community emissions measurement.
Can you take us into that project po a little bit? How do you think it will actually help in our plans to a greener future? Is it actually like a big chunk of what the local government needs to do to be able to help the national government to mitigate and adapt to climate change?
As Amy said, the LGUs are mandated to prepare their own greenhouse gas footprints. So in the case of the CSO, so what happened was we had a pilot project for a year in 2023 to 2024. And based on that proof of concept, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources through Secretary Loizaga got in touch with the Secretary of the local government, and they are parang using this template for the whole country, and joint circular was issued in October of last year. And based on the template, the ultimate objective is climate resilience and decarbonization in all communities. And related to that, as Professor Bendia said, you need to measure your footprint so you will know your action. So what we did in the Ako Ang Bukas movement is to develop a calculator reviewed by Climate Change Commission using the UN indices, but also using country indices to be more accurate. And then we give them for free. We train communities for free. We come up with reports as pilot for free. It's going to be parang lodged in a knowledge hub of the Climate Change Commission. And then there's a memo of agreement signed by Secretary Loizaga with the Green Convergence to make use of that calculator for the whole country. So yun yung magnification of the action. So we're going there.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead po.
Yeah, as Agnes mentioned, ideally it would, and also as Amy mentioned, ideally it would be good if local government can develop their greenhouse gas emission, because that will be good for planning purposes, also for mitigation. But we have to be cautious about doing it because it will be challenging. At national level, it was really challenging. At local level, it will be more challenging. The reason why I'm saying this is obviously, maybe if you recall, energy sector, it's it's the highest contributor. And then it's more on coming from the electricity generation. You're talking about power plants and the coal. We know already where the power plants are, located. So you will have an idea. But if you talk about transport sector, if you talk about transport, Laguna, Batangas, you have to quantify the amount, the vehicles that is going to and fro, and sometimes you will have a difficulty of duplicating it because a transport in Laguna will be transferring to maybe to Batangas, etc. So it's quite complicated. And even for animals, like we talk about enteric fermentation, a carabao maybe in Nueva Ecija will be going into another town. So that kind of complications. And I would say it's very ideal, but it's very challenging. So yeah, that's my view about it. So at the moment, we're doing it at a national level, and you can see anyway, so where the emissions are coming. Forestry is also a good thing. In talk about forests, we know where our forests are, and these are potential for carbon sequestration. But it will be, we can be selective in terms of the what could be the major regions contributing to the emissions in the country.
Yeah, it's challenging. That's why in the calculator itself, if in the international calculator for transport, you see only SUV or buses, in our calculator, we have tricycles, MRT, LRT, habal-habal, ferries, and so on. And also, I think the other challenging thing is funding, because you have to do surveys. That's why in the Transform program, it's a partnership between the private sector and the local government unit. For every local government unit, all the businesses are there. We do stock taking, and we get volunteers from the private sector to fund the survey for the community parang GHG inventory. But everyone must really do their thing, no? So we hope that the LGUs can also complete their footprint.
Hopefully po there'll be enough expertise as well to help them do their own GHG counting. But on that note, I have to shift gears because we're running out of time and we still have two big questions. Last week, President Marcos signed the Philippine Natural Gas Industry Development Act, positioning natural gas as a cost-effective energy source and a key component of energy security. It's actually included in the WG3 report on the LNG as a transition fuel. How do you think this might impact the pace and direction of the country's energy transition? Anyone from the authors? Maybe we can draw from the WG3 report as well.
Yeah. Well, we can see the wisdom in having a circular on that or an executive order, apart from being part of the Philippine Energy Plan, because as I said, we cannot go straight to 100%. But why not gas? Because among the non-RE, not gas can actually start up in minutes, unlike coal and hydro and even geothermal. So it can start up in minutes and really help in the intermittency. But the important thing there is the calibration. The amount of nat gas transition fuel or number of power plants and the timing. When you look at the UN Paris Agreement benchmark on when we should stop coal or we should stop nat gas. Coal, I think the benchmark is 2037 and nat gas is 2050. But we should go, let's veer away from those even ahead of that. That's why I said there is a runway, but we need to calibrate to make sure that we don't lock in so much emissions. So it's really a balancing of energy security and decarbonization. Because if you pull out nat gas now, that's a dislocation of 20% in Luzon alone. And as you know, we are on our way to the higher level of our economy. We want to nurture that first because financial resources are also important to have resources for adaptation and resilience. So everything must be calibrated and given attention.
Diana, can I add to that just very quickly? Yeah, so as Agnes mentioned, but please take note, if you compare natural gas and coal, natural gas is emitting low as compared to coal. And that's why we are saying that natural gas is better if you use it for power generation than the coal. And I pick up from Agnes' presentation that the coal will be replaced by solar in the future, but we still need natural gas during the peak loads. So we have to be it has to be there, because we cannot be 100% sure that we get away from the coal. We need something to fill in, particularly during the peak load. That's why in my view, I see natural gas will be better, and then replacing coal, and that will be better, I think, measures for reducing our emission in the country. Yeah, thank you.
And even in the IPCC, I think it's not also so much not gas. By 2050, RE should still dominate at 98%, maybe 87% before that, no? So yeah.
And finally, the one big question that it's everyone's mind right now, I think. It's also asked by one of our colleagues in the comments, right? But this one's from Gaya. How will Trump's move to withdraw from the US from the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time, reverse Biden's green policies, affect global climate action, particularly in terms of emissions reductions commitment? What are the potential repercussions, especially for climate vulnerable nations like the Philippines?
I think for one thing, pull out is not automatic under the rules of the Paris Agreement. Yeah, it takes another year. Many things can happen. Second, of course, the pull out of the US will be a big loss because they will be a source of funding, a source of technology. They're also emitters. But let us remember that they're not the only leaders that embrace net zero. We have a lot of leaders also in the Europe that can help. And also, that kind of decision must move us and drive our country towards more self-reliance, towards other actors like the private sector trying to invest in green markets so that we can at least parang ba, recover those that would have been given by developed countries if they are not. And also on the practical side, even in the United States, recall that 2 to 3 years ago, there was a pushback on climate, on envy, social and governance, and sustainability. But despite of that, businesses are owned by private people, by businessmen that are concerned about their assets being decimated by climate change. And therefore, what is being seen based on the Harvard study of last year was, even as there's a discouragement of sustainability and climate by policies or declarations in the United States, investors continue to require sustainability parameters and by social governance, and even came out with a requirement for disclosure on climate risk opportunities, investment measures, and performance, which we are complying in the Philippines, because precisely they don't want to have their assets affected by climate change, independent of policies, declaration. The money is owned by these investors, trillions of them being moved every day, and climate change is number one in their agenda. So there's a balancing act to this. Thank you.
And also, Biana, to share my thoughts also on the withdrawal by the US. I think based on the executive order on Paris withdrawal, ang nakalagay doon is that the US will abandon their obligations for any agreements under the UNFCCC, but not withdrawing from the convention itself. In fact, yung mga governors, as based on the news, ay nagpadala na rin, they have sent letter to the UNFCCC na commitments should be maintained. In fact, there yung mga state commitments and even their initiatives will be maintained. So of course, there will be an effect to the Philippines, particularly if we have to look at the the overall mitigation in global emissions, or the OMGE. So this will be ma-upset yung OMGE because a particular player has backed out or has withdrawn. So the overall mitigation will be affected sa global level. But of course, as mentioned by Agnes, there are a lot of committed countries, big emitters na sinasabi, now who will maintain their commitment. So yes, we've been at the negotiating table. We've been used to having this kind of setup wherein some parties would come and go and then return back. May kwan lang, the effect is that during that time na there was withdrawal, may mga slow down ang process. So I hope that this time parties to the convention have already learned the lesson how to deal with negotiators on the table who are still there, who will still be around but will not commit. Thank you po. Over to Vienna. Thank you.
Can I add to that, Vienna? So, I think it's gone. I don't know.
Okay pa.
Yeah, Vienna, are you there? Okay. Yeah, I just want to support what Albert mentioned. Actually, so this is the second time. But, and as Albert mentioned, they're not moving away from the convention, from the UNFCCC, only from the Paris Agreement. Meaning US will be there in the negotiation, talking about more of the convention issue, and they will be separated in terms of not participating in terms of the Paris Agreement. So US will be there. Another point that I want to emphasize is, Trump is constrained by the U.S. Constitution, meaning the decision-making process of U.S. is not only from the president; they have to consult the Congress, the Senate, the lower house. So there's still hope in that one. And he is elected by he is elected by Americans. He's not elected by the world. So meaning in terms of other players, they will be there. Like as Agnes mentioned, Europe #1 in terms of supporting environment. And I think in terms of the U.S. support, I think it will still be there. Like for the Philippines, for instance, in terms of capacity building, financial on adaptation, maybe a little bit mitigation on that, but more adaptation. U.S. will be there for capacity building support and also for other countries, including the Philippines. And one thing I want to mention also is like the big supporter of Trump is Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is producing a lot of electric vehicle. This electric vehicle will need energy, to push the challenge is how the electricity will be generated. And I'm hopeful that, as Albert mentioned, there are many, I would say states in the U.S. where they're still supporting more on the renewable energies. So I reviewed U.S. last year in terms of what they are doing, and I think they are in the right way of supporting technologies, and then that will be radiated globally. So I'm still hopeful that U.S. will play a big impact in terms of more on the climate change issue, particularly for the adaptation. Yeah, thank you.
I can see you smiling, Arnold. Hindi kita pakapakawalan. How about you?
Of course, we thank Ma'am Agnes, Sir Albert, and Sir Leandro on sharing their views. No, at the outset, we wish to highlight that the Philippines has been a long-term partner of the United States in various climate actions. So these development partnerships are based on the best available science, ensuring that strategies and interventions are evidence-based, effective, and sustainable. So in the past years, we've benefited a lot from support offered by the U.S. government. But we also cannot deny the fact, as mentioned by other speakers earlier, that the withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement is actually anticipated to pose substantial challenges to global actions. So malaki yung effect ng pag-withdraw nila. But we would also like to highlight nonetheless that the commitment of other nations, as mentioned by Sir Leandro earlier, and the other subnational entities within the US, it actually offers a glimmer of hope for the continued pursuit of climate objectives in the international arena. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to review our efforts and to negotiate smarter with other countries, which we can consider as allies in our climate actions. Um, uh, from the perspective of the Climate Change Commission, of course, as we prepare for the next negotiations and the next COP and even the next SPs, we work closely with the lead agencies in reviewing our targets, reviewing our ambitions to make sure that despite the withdrawal of this big partner or big country as such as the US, we still meet what our country's specific needs, aligned with our national priorities and development aspirations.
Thank you so much, Miss Amy. As before we close, or any message to the members of the media, maybe, who will be writing these stories later.
Okay.
You're
Thank
muted.
you. Okay. So would this now serve as the closing for our event? So
Yeah.
I guess um well, I think I'll just request our media partners to help the Climate Change Commission by using this report from the OML, disseminate more information to our to the public that is evidence-based and actually based on best available data. And these data which is the official data of the government. So they can actually they would actually be reporting on the uh, national circumstances that are affecting um, our country, and also please report on um, how we are addressing climate change. Not only that it is affecting us greatly, but there are actually a lot of success stories. There's a publication prepared by the Climate Change Commission. It's called Stories of Resilience. It's a compendium of some success stories on how the Philippines has tried to address the impacts of climate change as it continues to worsen. But still, we are doing our best to cope, and for mitigation, we are doing our best not to add on to the problem. So if to close, we just thank you for for the partnership, and we look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, and sorry we went a little bit over time because ang dami pong tanong na kailangan nating masagot. For everyone who joined us live, thank you so much for being part of this briefing. This briefing is actually recorded and will be available on demand to the members of our exclusive media network. And some of them may not be here because they're also doing other things, but they asked me to send this right away and to actually also send them some some of the reports that can actually help the reporting as well. We will be sending you the copy of the WG3 report for your perusal. But our friends, we heard the science and we know the commitments right now, and it's actually time to act, not just from the governments and other stakeholders, but from us journalists as well. We need to bridge these ideas to real world challenges and to actually collaborate and tie it up to stories on the ground. So as journalists, our stories can really make a difference. We bring life to these issues, and we hold people accountable, and of course inspire action. So remember, every one of us should really be a climate reporter now. Again, we'll send you materials from today's session, and our panelists hopefully are open for follow-up questions if our friends from media would like to dig deeper. Thanks again. You can wait to see the impact of your reporting. Please send us your articles once you're done. Thank you again. Maraming salamat din po to our experts here in the call. Thank you.